You may wonder why I'm glue sticking my mouth shut. This is actually a swivel stick ultimate moisturizer, cocoa butter. And I ordered what I thought were 5 from Amazon and got 5 dozen, something like that. So I'm set. Gotta wait till 1 o'clock. There it is. All right. Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Thank you for joining me, and thank you especially to those of you who are joining me live on Integral Live, and thank you to Integral Life for sponsoring the Daily Evolver live on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And yeah, here we are. So today I wanted to take a look at a debate that I saw on television that I thought was really interesting. And it gets to the issue that, Integral gets into a lot, and certainly we do in the Daily Evolver. And that is the question of, is the world getting better, or is it, unprecedentedly bad, or is it getting worse, or what's going on here? And, at the Daily Evolver, at least, I often just point to evolution in general. And that is that whether it's the evolution of animals and primates and all of that, or the evolution of consciousness and culture, it's beautiful in its result. We get the peacock, we get the modern world, we get us at our best, but getting there certainly was not pretty. So that is sort of an integration that I try to work with here, but somehow it doesn't seem to turn up in the regular world. Certainly not in this debate, but it's still a really interesting debate by two people who are really, really highly thought of in the, mainstream world at large. We're talking about Steven Pinker and Neil Ferguson. And this is a debate that was on the Fareed Zakaria show, GPS, I believe it's called. And hang on one second, I have to turn off this heater. So this debate was on Fareed Zakaria's Global Public Square, the GPS show that he has on Sunday mornings. And he started out with, and I'll just quote this, I can't play too many pieces of it because they don't like that in the copyright police. So I'm going to read what Fareed said to introduce things. He said, put aside details of border walls and shutdowns, threat of nuclear weapons and AR-15s, Syria and North Korea, shrinking sea ice and rising Ebola infections. And look at the big picture of the world today. Are we in a dark moment, as it may seem to you if you read the front page of most newspapers or spend any time on Twitter? Or are we in one of the best periods in all of humanity? Or are we in one of the best periods in all of humanity, where a few bad trends overshadow all of the good news. All right. So at that point, he turns it over to Steven Pinker and he says, what's your take on this? And of course, Steven Pinker, if you don't know, I talk a good bit about him on the show, actually. He wrote two very important books to me. One is The Better Angels of Our Nature, and the other is Enlightenment Now, where he makes a solid statistical scholarly case for, as he puts it, the improvement of human flourishing in virtually all domains over the millennia. And he is a professor of psychology at Harvard. And so here's how he answers that first question. And it's going to take me a minute, you know how that is. I'll edit this out, but this is what you live people have to live through. Sorry. Okay. Hang on. Oh, and I'm going to have to do this too, so I can hear it without feeding into the main mic. Here we go. And then we share. No. Don't you get started yet. Okay. It'll be easier from now on. Hang on.
Is going to emphasize the negative because bad things can happen quickly. But good things aren't built in a day, and they can creep up on us by stealth. So if something explodes, if there's a shooting, if a building collapses, that's news. But if the global extreme poverty rate declines by a few percentage points, there's never a Thursday in October in which it happens, in which it makes the headlines. But when you track the data year by year, you see that the world can be transformed, and there's never a point at which it makes the news.
All right, so then Fareed comes back at Pinker with an argument that I have had leveled against my worldview as well. And this is a book that was written in 1911 called The Great Illusion by Norman Angell, that predicted that war was, well, you can hear the argument that they're going to have about that. But this is a book that famously, before the conflagrations of starting with World War I, the Depression, the Mao, Stalin, World War II, the concentration camps, nuclear war, the whole bit, this 1911, this guy comes out with this popular book called The Great Illusion that predicted that war was over, basically. And so Fareed comes back at Pinker with that. And then I'll get what Pinker says to him.
It did. Now, and by the way, Norman Angell did not predict that war could not happen. He just predicted if it did happen.
But many people read the book and said that, you know, because it represented what seemed like a century of peace and progress that had taken place.
Well, only if you look at certain parts of Europe. It wasn't so peaceful in the United States, which had the worst war in its history, the Civil War. Wasn't so peaceful in China, which had the worst civil war in human history, the Taiping Rebellion. Not so peaceful in Southern Africa, which had the conquest of Shaka.
Well, then you're making my point. I'm not quite sure. The point I'm trying to make is that despite that illusion of peace, the next 30 years proved to be war-filled, violent, bloody.
Yes, and it can happen. And I'm not predicting that it can't happen. No one could predict that. But of course.
All right. So that's an interesting debate. And I really wish that integral theory, developmental theory, could be injected here, because what is a far more telling distinction between, say, America in the 1800s, America in the 1910s, the America now, is, you know, we don't have the same chances of these things happening. And the reason is because we've developed. And we have developed into a culture that has a center of gravity at modern. It's basically as simple as that. Now, there are still people who have pre-modern worldviews, but they're a minority now. There are people with postmodern worldviews. They're a minority. But all told together, for the developed world, there has been a stabilized center of gravity, a developmental baseline, if you will, at modern, largely because of the middle 50 years of the 20th century, where we all learned a lot of lessons. And that's, the nature of why evolution is beautiful but not pretty. So, what we still have, as I say, there's still pre-modern people in the developed world. There are also many countries that are pre-modern in the center of gravity of the people, all of the people. And there are certainly subcultures like that, like ISIS. Pre-modern people still basically, they love war. At amber traditionalism, they believe in war because there's still God's on their side. But if you can believe that, ISIS, this band of, medieval thinking people, thought that they were going to re-usher in the caliphate, and it made perfect sense to them. It makes no sense to us, but it makes perfect sense to them because of one thing that we don't even recognize: God. God was on their side, and God can do anything. And that's also true for people at traditionalism. At amber, ISIS we're talking is red. That's the warrior stage. Amber traditionalism is that still the belief is that their tribe, their religion, their group, their country will ultimately triumph, and largely because they still have a religious worldview. And so, the question is, can the modern world hold? Can the modern consensus in the developed world, and also the skin of modernity that still runs things in the world, for better and worse, but largely for better, in that the world is radically more peaceful than it's ever been. And that's, difficult to say when there are places that are as abjectly war-torn as there have ever been in all of humanity. But again, centers of gravity. But the difference between the modern world and the pre-modern world, and I'm talking worldviews, is once you get to modern, you see that you get a sense that history is moving somewhere. And you want to build a future that is better than what we have. And you want to deliver your children into a better future. At pre-modern, and I'm talking traditionalism and earlier, people don't want further development. They actually want a return. Well, maybe that's the development to them, but a return to the good old days where, It was God and country, and everybody knew who they were, and we didn't have all this confusion and all of these people, and we all knew who we were. And there's an example of this. We talk about the subculture in the traditionalists in the developed world, and in America. Here's a tweet from their leader, or I guess he's our leader, but Trump. Hang on here. And it's a tweet that he put out the other day about Bible literacy classes in public schools. And you can see, he says, numerous states introducing Bible literacy classes, giving students the option of studying the Bible. Starting to make a turn back? Great. Is the culture starting to make a turn back? This is the Make America Great Again thing. And, that's a real, easy line between pre-modern and modern and postmodern people. So there's that. Okay. All right. So next, I want to play a segment from Neil Ferguson. Hang on here. Starting at 8:53, which is coming up here. Here we go. Yeah, good. Got it. Okay. So now I make this full screen over here, which means that. I wish that would not make it play when I did that. Hang on here. And again, I want to be careful not to play too much because I get whacked. All right, that'll work, I guess. Okay, so here I'm going to share the screen. Desktop 2, yeah, everything's all right. Share, and here we go. This is Neil Ferguson's response, basically.
I think there's some truth in what you say, Fareed, though I'm careful in saying that there are very clear trends with respect to, say, democracy. The trend that I'm most interested in, which I think has the greatest potential to disrupt democratic and undemocratic societies, is our trend towards being a networked world. Because one of the arguments I made in the Square and the Tower, I think, has been vindicated, that by creating a highly integrated network world online with giant network platforms such as Facebook and Google, we've created a much less stable public sphere in which fake news and extreme views are in fact proliferated because of the way that the algorithms work and the business models of these companies. Now that's a trend that is disrupting all kinds of different countries, from the United States all the way to Myanmar, in ways that I think are actually quite troubling. And I don't think we have a good answer to the question, what do we do to preserve democracy and the rule of law in an age of institutionalized fake news on social media? That seems to me a big worry.
Okay. And that's basically the thesis of Ferguson's argument, is that, as he says earlier in the show, I don't violently disagree with Pinker that trend lines in terms particularly of physical material wealth and physical security, the trend lines are strongly favorable. But there's always things that can go wrong here. Now, I have to say that he makes that argument as if Pinker weren't also making it, and Pinker goes to great pains to make that argument in his books that things can go wrong, and he has lots on that. So it's a little bit of a straw man argument in terms of him and Pinker, and I think they're sort of professional enemies, so whatever. But what he's saying is that, there's the black swan. And he also points something out here that I think Integral can help shine a light on. And he's talking about that what's happening now is this total unintended thing regarding social media and, tying the world, networking the world together, is that we have fake news and disruptions from the horrible civil war in Myanmar to, the Trump show, which we probably wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for this disruption of Facebook and social media. So, but there's still a progress implicit in that is worth noting. And that is, the danger is not violence on a gross scale, that we would say an integral. There's three dimensions of reality that we often refer to, dimensions of reality. One is the gross realm, the realm of the physical, the subtle realm, the realm of ideas and thoughts and, commerce and that sort of thing. And then the causal realm, which is the more or less spiritual part of the spectrum. And what we're seeing here is that as the world develops, the conflicts move from the gross realm, from physical clubs and guns and, bombs, to where we're fighting on social media platforms. And we're having cyber wars, and we're having culture wars, and we might be having financial wars, and that sort of thing. And that, any idea that the world is improving and getting better has to take into account that we still have a lot of fighting forward to do. Now, Integral sees that fighting is an engine of evolution. It's unfortunate. I wouldn't have set the universe up this way if it were me, but God saw it differently, and we do fight, and the other F word, our way forward, and those are sort of the two poles of how we do it. And so we're moving in the developed world, the pre-modern world, particularly the red world, hasn't got the memo. But in the modern world, we're fighting at more in the subtle level and sort of a higher level of gross physical, if you will, trade wars, that sort of things. And so that sort of begs the question, will we eventually evolve into where we're fighting wars on the causal realm and the spiritual realm? And seems to me I fought a few. So maybe, I don't know. See how that goes. So anyway, so then Steven Pinker responds to this critique, and he talks about the networked world, and he points out that this is always true when a new medium of communication comes online. And he talks about what happened after the Gutenberg press came online, and we all of a sudden had books, and that there was this new medium which spread all sorts of horrible things. Like fake books of the Bible and the protocols of the elders of Zion. And, it was a Wild West, and screeds of all sorts, But then over time, there was, as he put it, an immune response to that. And a regime settled in to curb the worst excesses. Now, none of us, think that, oh, shoot, too bad about books and publishing, even though, even during the sort of pre-internet dark ages, the KKK managed to limp along with mimeograph machines, but now see, and this is also a really, I think, important insight of Integral, is that one of the great dangers of our age is modern, I was going to say weapons, but just modern technology in the hands of a pre-modern mentality. So yes, the internet could never be invented by these people who are peddling conspiracy theories or, tribal triumphalism, but it can be used by those people. And that is, that's an ongoing struggle. And, we are absolutely seeing an immune response to that is coming online. And, a lot of people have had a 180 turn, particularly in Facebook and Twitter, and really seeing them for not, we tend to go from light to dark. So we see them as, not, might forget about their good qualities, but, we see them for the pernicious effects that they've had. All right. And Ferguson comes back. I'm going to play a segment here where he makes that point and develops it a little bit more. Yeah, here we go. All right. Now, I'm going to put you full screen, and don't you dare start playing. Will you give the internet an inch? There we go. All right. So I did that. Now I got to do this. Go to share, desktop 2, make sure everything's still pumping through. There we go. Yep, share it. All right, so this is how Ferguson responds to this idea of, this was also what happened when books came online.
How you'd respond?
Steve, that was after 130 years of religious conflict that the printing press undoubtedly fueled. It took a long time to get from Martin Luther to the Peace of Westphalia, and I think one of the lessons of our time is that analogy that you've just made is very good, that in many ways the personal computer and the internet have done the same to our era as the printing press did to the 16th and 17th centuries, but that's a disquieting thing because it really did produce polarization, epidemics of crazy ideas. You didn't mention the best example, which is the idea that witches live amongst us, which went completely viral on both sides of the Atlantic and led to thousands of people being horribly killed for absolutely no good reason. That seems to me a reason to be quite cautious about where we're going from here.
All right. And he goes on to say that it may not be 130 years of discord that the internet's setting off, but it could be 30 of, wild political polarization. I suppose that's true. I think the immune response is going to come on quicker than that. But yeah, there's, hang on here. Again, I think integral theory would be so helpful here. And to see that there's really not much danger that we're going to do anything like burn witches in the modern and pre-modern world, and even the traditional world. Now, there is undoubtedly examples, I know there are, in Myanmar, where villages are burned because of Facebook, because of rumor mongering on Facebook, which is basically the same thing as witch burning. These people are against our God, and they must not only be, they're not only wrong, they're bad, they need to be eliminated. And that's a cascade of thought that happens very easily in the pre-modern mind, but not the modern mind. And we can rely on that, actually. All right. So let's see here. See if there's anything else I wanted to say before I get to this other part. All right, so the other thing that Pinker points out, and I think is really important, is to note that the human psyche has a built-in negativity bias, in the sense that we're far more tuned to what can go wrong than what can go right. And that's an evolutionarily appropriate thing. I mean, we want to be more aware of the saber-toothed tiger, you'll use an old example, who's about to, jump off the rock and get us, than to where there might be new fresh berries. And that is built into us. But yeah, there's an ever increasing realization of where humanity can go and how we're, what the future could be. And just because Norman Angell wrote a book in 1911 that said that war was likely over, or at least was ruinously expensive, which, as Pinker points out, was actually what he said and it was actually true, that he might not have been right yet. You know, if I think of the other sort of horrible things that human beings have transcended, it's not to say we've completely eliminated them, but cannibalism, you know, it might well have been that for years before cannibalism was eventually eliminated in various cultures, that there were people sitting around saying, you know, I don't think we ought to be doing this anymore. And I think we're going to stop doing this. And they were not right then, but they were right eventually because, you know, they sort of sensed the movement of history, perhaps. Same with slavery. You know, just because you predict the end of something doesn't mean that it's going to happen immediately. And so there are people who are always sort of at the cutting edge of these kinds of insights. And I do think that Norman Angell is right. There, I've said it. And that we will eventually see the end of war. Now, and I'm talking war in the gross realm, not necessarily on the subtle and causal realms, but war on, getting rid of war on the gross realm, on the physical realm. Wow, that is, got to call that progress, don't we? So, and then the other thing that Pinker points out, and I do often as well, is, okay, so maybe a positive prediction wasn't exactly right. But how about all these predictions of doom that we have all been, you know, bombarded with our whole life? And I think of, you know, in my life, it's been, you know, overpopulation and poverty and famine and Y2K and killer bees and Ebola and mad cow and herpes. I remember when herpes was the worst thing that could have ever happened. And now we don't even talk about it. Race wars, peak oil, collapses of all kinds. I mean, you ought to go to the collapse subreddit, the community on Reddit that is about collapse. I mean, they just see it everywhere. And, you know, oftentimes these theories or warnings are espoused by serious credentialed people. They're run on endless loops by the media. And, you know, I can see that it's part of our negativity bias. I can see the evolutionary potency of it because, again, you know, we want to see what could possibly go wrong. But it does eventually get under the skin and, you know, causes a lot of, I think, consternation and depression that aren't really warranted. And this is not a new insight, by the way. I collected a few quotes from other people who have pointed this out. And this is, the first one's from Adam Smith. Excuse me. Adam Smith during the Industrial Revolution. This is from Adam Smith during the Industrial Revolution. Industrial. I'm doing that one more time. This is from Adam Smith during the Industrial Revolution. And he writes, 5 years have seldom passed away in which some book or pamphlet has not been published pretending to demonstrate that the wealth of the nation was fast declining, that the country was depopulated, agriculture neglected, manufactures decaying, and trade undone. John Stuart Mill wrote, I have observed that not the man who hopes when other John Stuart Mill writes, I have observed that not the man who hopes when others despair, but the man who despairs when others hope is admired by a large class of persons as a sage. I found that to be true. From Friedrich Hayek, implicit confidence in the beneficence of progress has implicit confidence in the beneficences of progress has come to be regarded as the sign of a shallow mind. And then finally, from Matt Ridley, he writes, let me make a square concession at the start. And this is from the introduction to his book, The Evolution of Everything. And I like Ridley. He's a doctrinaire liberal, and we don't end up on the same side of the fence politically sometimes, but he's smart. So again, Matt Ridley. Let me make a square concession at the start. The pessimists are right when they say that if the world continues as it is, it will end in disaster for all of humanity. I'll concede that. If all transport depends on oil and oil runs out, then transport will cease. If agriculture continues to depend on irrigation and aquifers and they're depleted, then starvation will ensue. But notice the conditional if. The world will not continue as it is. And that is a subtle point, but we got to, if we're looking at, the trend lines of humanity, we have to factor in creativity. And that's not always factored in with the collapse people. But, I would point out that all the people I just quoted, including Steven Pinker, they're all white Enlightenment guys. And Pinker is very identified with the Enlightenment. In fact, his second book was called Enlightenment Now. And it was interesting to me that when they introduced him on the show, they didn't talk about Enlightenment Now. They went back to his first book from, I think, 2011, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Both are bestsellers, but I wonder if he's stepping away from that a bit. But it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that the Enlightenment is controversial, but it is in the sense that progressive politics, and we're talking green progressive politics, associates the Enlightenment with white identity. And, so does the white identity movement, unfortunately. These comments by the Representative Steve King a couple weeks ago about, why can't we talk about white pride? We came up with the Enlightenment. We came up with the Industrial Revolution, we white people. Why can't we talk about white supremacy even? And that was where the white supremacy comment got him with even his fellow Republicans. And he was censured. And I think, I guess people say he's on his way out, but we'll see. But at any rate, for, lefty progressives, the Enlightenment is basically white people history. And that is, that's really unfortunate because, what can I say? I mean, if we're talking about the Enlightenment as science and reason, as the basically the enlightening of the human mind, that is the heritage of humanity. And, where it happens is irrelevant. And that's really something that we get deeply at Integral, is that all of this whole catastrophe of history is all of ours. We don't have to slice and dice it and see who it belongs to. The part of the critique of the Enlightenment that I think is actually accurate, and also applies to Pinker, this is a critique of Pinker that I agree with, is that there's a certain triumphalism even to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment idea was that once everybody, the earlier ideas is once my tribe wins out and we're in charge, then everything's going to be great. And then we get into traditionalism. Okay, once my God, once my religion is spread far and wide and everybody adopts it, then it's going to be great. Well, the Enlightenment got rid of both of those, but it brought on a whole new sort of triumphalist idea, which is that once everybody becomes reasonable and once everybody adopts science and logic, then everything's going to be okay. And that's just not how it works. The Enlightenment comes online, but the other stuff stays online too. And so it's a whole big evolving mess. And Pinker, I'm not sure he quite gets that. I think that requires a sense of, I know he's a psychology professor, but he misses an interiority. Maybe it's the spiritual interiority that doesn't recognize that there's a living quality to history, that there's an erotic move, there's an updraft of history, that we are being lived, that there's a loving intelligence that is permeating everything. And, once you start talking like that, you can't stay in the academy. And that's where Pinker wants to stay. I don't blame him. I'm good with that. We need people in the academy saying what he's saying. I think Ferguson, he makes a good point too. It can go bad at any moment. I don't think Pinker doesn't say that. But I think with all of it, we can see a net gain and an updraft of history that at this point we can rely on and see that there's, things beneath which we're not going to go back to cannibalism anytime soon here, unless life conditions radically change. I mean, if we get hit by an asteroid, who knows? But, if the things play out, even the bad side of the street, that, there's still that forward movement that doesn't catch the news every day, but it's happening and it's reliable. All right. That's my story today. And I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you got some food for thought. Thank you again to Integral Life. And if you're interested to see my whole body of work, you can go to my personal website, dailyevolver.com. All right, that's it for today, folks. Jeff Salzman signing off. See you next time.